Bismillah, Dr. Basma.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I just want to make sure first that everybody can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can. Alhamdulillah.
Excellent. Well, Ramadan Kareem to everybody. Thank you very much for the privilege allowing me to speak with you today in this blessed month. May Allah accept your fast and my fast, Ya Rabb, and everything good that we do. Bi'Iznillah, the best of what we do. So today, as you just mentioned, I was asked to speak about the revival of the individual. And I decided to do something that I don't normally do in public seminars, which is to talk about my personal journey. Because as it turns out, my personal journey is not so personal after all. In fact, the essential elements that led to my revival turn out to be the essential elements of Islam and the essential elements that are recommended for every believer. So let me share highlights of that journey with you. Alhamdulillah, I've never had any doubts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or about Islam or being Muslim. The idea of the unseen for me was pretty much something I accepted from my childhood. But it was not until my late teens that I began to take this journey of faith very seriously. I was curious to know how this religion that I had been born into would change me and what insight I would gain into life and beyond. The Quran states, "O you who believe, reply in the affirmative to Allah and the Prophet when he invites you to what will revive you, and know that Allah rounds between a person and his heart, and that to him you will all be gathered." I thought, wow, can I really be revived? Am I not already alive? Aren't we all already alive? The truth is, many people are just living. And that's not the same as being alive. To be alive in the Quranic sense is to see the truth. And when we see the truth, to think and act accordingly. Only Allah has the power to revive us, both in our life and after our death. The question then is, what are we being invited to? How can we access this light, this truth, so that we can be alive and not just merely living? The first step that I decided to undertake seriously, which many of us take for granted and many of us unfortunately neglect, is prayer or a salah. The Quran tells us establish regular prayers 5 times a day on time. While this is basic, it is also major. Just listen to what the Quran says about prayer and seek assistance through patience and prayer. And it is surely a big challenge, except for the humble. That's in 245. Guard your prayers and the middle prayer and stand up obediently to Allah, 238. And those who hold fast to the book and establish prayer, we do not fail the reward of those who set matters right. It also states, recite what has been revealed to you of the book and establish prayer. Verily, prayer shields from what is indecent and reprehensible. And surely the remembrance of Allah is greatest, and Allah knows what you are doing. So, and these are just some. By the way, I cannot possibly go through all of the ayat in the Quran for each of the elements that we're going to mention in the next half hour, or we'd be here for quite some time. So I'm highlighting just some of them to show you the significance that the Quran places on these essentials. And not just the Quran, of course, the Sunnah and our faith more broadly. I'm focusing on the Quran because this is the month of Ramadan, and this is the month that we pay tribute and show gratitude for the Quran in particular. So after you've disciplined yourself with these 5 prayers, I started to add more. especially during the night prayer. And again, the Quran singles out the night prayer as very clear and very peaceful. So the night prayer was very important. And every person's different, and I don't know how long it's going to take you, but salah or prayer is so significant, not only in your individual life, but in the collective life of the community. Every community I visit around the world, I have one observation. If it is not a community that is getting up to pray together, it is very hard to stay together. It is very hard to do other things together. If we could get communities, families, to wake up and pray together, if we had that obedience, if we had that discipline as an ummah, we would be somewhere very, very different. But today is just about revival of our own selves. But if we do it collectively, we can be the greatest ummah once more. So, my dear brothers and sisters in Nigeria, of Micah, this is your fundamental link with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and with the prophets. Those 5 breaks every day from the world soothe your soul, reframe your daily activities. They change your mood. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, when he saw somebody angry, he'd say, go do wudu, because water soothes, and changing your posture soothes and changes your mood of anger. Prayer is very important, and I cannot emphasize it enough. You have one master and no other. Visit him 5 times a day in earnest. So that was my first dedication, really, is to get my prayers correctly and to add more to them. The second initiative that I undertook was to read and study the Quran and the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, or his biography, who he was. Reading the Quran is extremely significant. As you saw from some of the verses that had to do with prayer, it comes with, the book and reading the Quran, understanding the Quran. Make a commitment to read or to listen to it, or both. Struggle to understand its meanings. When I started this journey quite early on, it took me 1 year to read the Quran in full with commentary. And maybe not everybody can do this, or everybody's interested in doing this, but you asked me today to speak about what would revive you. And this is a very big part of it. As I mentioned, you and I and all Muslims around the world fasting in Ramadan are bearing witness to the revelation of the Quran, and to its beauty and to its peace and to the discernment that it gives us. The way it teaches us what is right and what is wrong, and how we can use our own reason in the correct ways. Okay? So reading the Quran is an incredible responsibility. Its lessons don't only come in its ahkam, which we're used to hearing, which are the rulings. A lot of people are focused on that, but that's a very small part of the Quran. The Quran is extensive. It has beautiful content and style and rhythm, and all of this together really will impact who you are and will penetrate you in very unique ways. Not everybody's going to have the same experience with the Quran. Not everybody's going to draw the same lessons from the Quran. It depends on where you're coming from in your life, what issues you may have, what solutions you're looking for. So it's going to differ. And this is where, it's good. You may rely on people. I'm sorry, this is a message. You may rely on people to help you understand the message of the Quran, but you must also read it for yourself. The Rasul, as we know from what Sayyida Aisha told us, was a walking Quran. This meant that he internalized the meanings in everything he did. Every time there was a revelation, it became a part of him. And there's no reason why all of us cannot be walking Qurans. We just need to study it, and we need to practice it. And we need to understand, on the topic of the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam and the importance of reading his seerah in parallel, is to know who he was. One of the main problems with a lot of misinformation is we don't know our prophet. We don't know him well enough. And so we're very vulnerable sometimes to believe things that just don't make sense. When we hear something about him, there's three main questions you have to ask yourself. And these are, does this conform to the Quran? Because he was a walking Quran. So nothing he's going to say or do is going to be far from that meaning. Number two, does this conform to his character that was very merciful? The Quran says, we have not sent you except as a mercy to the worlds. And finally, does it conform to the actual events of his life? Was this something that we saw him do? Is this something that he lived? So these are very important things, and they draw our attention to the fact that in reading the Quran, we also have to study the life of the Prophet ﷺ. The Quran is our light, and he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was its brightest bearer. This knowledge will certainly be part of your revival. The third thing that I began to realize, and you might think that this was obvious from the beginning, which is the deeper meaning of Tawheed, or of La ilaha illallah. We start with La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. There is no deity but Allah. But we don't realize sometimes that this has a very deep and complex meaning. It's not just a statement that we say to demonstrate that we are Muslim. I believe in one God. Well, what does that mean? What does this unity mean? One God. It means unity in the universe and in his creation. It means that we are all intricately interdependent. The very first surah that was revealed, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق الإنسان من علق. Read in the name of your Lord that created man or humans, al-insan, humans, people, from something that clings or that has attachment. So from our very inception, we are attached, we are dependent on something. We are dependent on each other. And keeping these relationships solid and performing our duties within these relationships is very important in terms of the meaning of actualizing Tawheed, bringing Tawheed to life. The Quran tells us that those who break Allah's promise after having agreed to it and sever what Allah commanded to be joined and corrupt in the earth, these are the losers. It's in chapter 2:27. Again, those who sever what Allah commanded to be joined. Now, if you think about it, if everything in the universe is interdependent in one way or another, we are commanded to make sure that the way we act upon the world does not diminish these relations, does not violate these relations, not only among ourselves as human beings, but in the animal world and in the plant world as well. We're living through this crazy time of COVID-19, and we have to realize that about 75% of the viruses that humans get, we get from animals. So we have to ask, why are we getting them from animals? Why is this cross-species, this infection happening? We have to rethink our relationship with nature and our relationship with animals. The Quran tells us that everything has its way of praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And every animal, whether in the sky or on land, praises him and has its prayers. We just don't understand. We cannot violate other living forms without there being a consequence. In the Quran, Allah tells us, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَسْتَحِي أَنْ يَضْرِبَ مَثَلًا مَا بَعُوضَ فَمَا فَوْقَهَا. God does not disdain from giving us the example of a flea or a gnat and what is above it. And when you think that one of the main vectors of viruses are fleas, the bubonic plague in 638 in the nascent Muslim community that killed about 20,000 of Islam's elite guard came through bubonic plague, which comes through fleas, subhanallah. And the verse right after it, Allah is telling us, do not sever what Allah commanded to be joined. We have to make these links when we read the Quran, and we have to make these links when we are thinking about what Tawheed means in our lives and in the welfare of the planet on which we live. The fourth essential element in reviving yourself has to do, of course, with fasting. So I struggled with the deeper meanings of fasting. You know, when we grow up and we're told, you know, go beyond the hunger and the thirst and empathy with the less fortunate and the health benefits that come with fasting. And of course, please don't misunderstand me. These are all extremely important outcomes and lessons that we learn from fasting. But perhaps they're not the deepest. Some of the deepest come from a recognition that when we fast, we're disciplining our will. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us, look, you have your emotions, you have your desires, you have your hunger, you have your thirst, you have your moods, you have all of these things, but I gave you something. I gave you something called your will, with which you could overcome all of these faculties, with which you could make better decisions, with which you could be obedient to me. And that is the gift of fasting. That is what we do this month. And when we thank for the Quran, we're thanking Allah for having revealed to us the code that enables us to use this will in the correct way. What does the Quran tell us? O you who believe, fasting is decreed upon you as it was decreed on your predecessors, so that you may be heedful. In chapter 2, 183. It also tells us fasting was decreed so that we may give thanks, and again, so that we may be heedful. The link of heedfulness or taqwa, you may think of it as piety, that's fine, is magnificent in the Quran. Think of taqwa as your ability to consistently prioritize the instructions of Islam for the sake of Allah above your feelings, your moods, your emotion, your intelligence, your tendencies, anything that could potentially prevent you. Sometimes it supports you, sometimes it prevents you from actualizing your will. So think of taqwa as that, your ability to consistently prioritize the instructions of Islam. It is only when you fast that you factually prove to yourself, as I mentioned, that your will can overcome all of these other emotions and faculties. Fasting proves that there is a stronger voice in all of us that is guided by Allah. It is not surprising then that we're told in the Quran that even if we could expiate for, not unintentionally missing the fast, that it's best that we fast. That's in 2:184. And why fasting, is prescribed when, God forbid, there are major mistakes like accidental manslaughter or breaking an oath or killing game during the Hajj or certain types of verbal abuse of one's wife. The Quran prescribes fasting because fasting will rediscipline your will and it will bring you back to your original sense of dignity. The fifth very essential part of my journey was that I disciplined myself to give of what I love, not just materially, but intellectually and spiritually. Discipline yourself to give. The Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam said, Prophet Muhammad stated, nobody can call him or herself a believer if he or she does not love for his brethren what he or she loves for him or herself. So, and the Quran also says, do not give to others what you yourself would take while you are cringing. You have to give of what you love. You have to give of what is beautiful. And there's the obligatory part of giving, of course, which is the zakah, but go beyond that with sadaqah. And don't try to minimize these amounts. I so often see people trying to minimize, how much do I have in the bank? How do I calculate my wealth on this? And it's almost like they're paying taxes to the government and not, as the Quran says, loaning a beautiful loan to God, which is essentially what you're doing. Everything you do, subhanAllah, nothing will be overlooked. These are the greatest transactions that you're going to make in your life, and they will benefit you in your life, and they will benefit you in your akhirah, inshallah. The Quran tells us, and establish prayer and give zakat. Whatever good you send forth for your souls, you shall find it with Allah. Verily Allah sees what you do, in chapter 2, 110. It also says, they ask you what they should spend of charity. Whatever you spend that is good, it is for parents and kindred and orphans and those in want and wayfarers. And whatever you do that is good, Allah knows it well. in 215. And again, those who in charity spend of their goods by night and by day, in secret and in public, have their reward with their Lord. On them there shall be no fear, nor shall they grieve. Listen to that. No fear, no grief. Because you're giving something beautiful, you're giving of what you love, you're making somebody else's existence that much more beautiful and tolerable. You're showing people you care. And give people dignity when you give. You know, I was traveling last summer. I was in Spain. And you don't always have to do this, but this was a moment of realization for me. There was a young lady sitting by the side of the street, and I had just bought 2 pieces of dessert, sweets. And I ate one, and I still had one. And I thought, I'm going to share it. And I went and I gave it to her. But I gave it to her in such a quick way, because I know my faith tells me, you know, don't stand around, don't make them feel uncomfortable. But it wasn't the right thing to do, because when I gave it to her and she looked up at me with this massive smile, I should have given her her dignity. I should have said something kind. I should have asked her how she was. Sometimes it's not the best thing to just give something to somebody and walk away. Sometimes giving them their dignity first is more important than sharing. I don't think she took it as hard as I took it, but I vowed from that day on, if I was going to do something like that I had to be more observant and I had to be more kind when I gave. So that's an important part of giving. The Quran tells us, if you disclose acts of charity, even so it is well. But if you conceal them and make them reach those really in need, that is best for you. It will remove some of your wrongdoings, and Allah is with what you do knowing. So give in open and give in secret. Give little or give plenty, but give. Give with pure intention, give with an open heart, and don't do it with any reminders. You are loaning to Allah, not the person you are giving to. My final and essential part of my journey that was big was that I was honored, alhamdulillah, and privileged to have been invited twice to Allah's home in Mecca to perform the Hajj. And of course, the Hajj is something different than the rest of what I have been talking about, because it only applies if you're capable, if you're physically, psychologically, and financially capable of performing it. For those who can do it though, Hajj is an incredibly unique experience. The Quran states, verily the first house erected for people is the one in Mecca, or Becca in the Quran, blessed and a guidance for the worlds. 396. In it are clear proofs of the station of Abraham, and whoever enters it is secure, and for Allah it is incumbent on people the pilgrimage of the house. For those who have the means, and whoever is ungrateful, then surely Allah is not in need of the worlds. It also tells us, and it tells us that the Quran tells us that when you've completed the rites of Hajj, that we should mention Allah a lot, and we should do dua. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Our Lord, grant us good in this world and in the hereafter, and save us from the torment of the fire. So again, the Hajj is very essential to your journey for revival in the world and in the hereafter, if you have the capability. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever performs Hajj for the sake of Allah and does not utter any obscene speech or do any evil deed will go back free of sin as his mother bore him. And as beautiful as the Hajj is, there's lots of hope for people that cannot perform the Hajj. By the way, your sins are eliminated in Ramadan. They're eliminated when you do faithful prayer. Everything we do in our religion allows us to ask for forgiveness and allows us to have this opportunity. It is not unique to the Hajj, although the Hajj is the one major event that enables this. So like all the other rites in Islam, the Hajj is a very personal experience. For me, I was in the middle of crowds of millions, but I felt alone. But at the same time, I could hear people praying and pleading, but But I was confident that my prayers were being heard, that I was receiving special attention from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I saw humanity at its best, and I saw humanity at its worst. And it deeply touched me. You will turn very deeply inward, but at the same time, because of the conditions of Hajj, because of the number of people that are there, because of the people that need help, the people that get sick, the people that need to be fed, you will also realize that the world needs you to be out there, and it needs your strength, and that you cannot fully turn in outwards and neglect these things without missing an essential experience of being part of this incredible annual event. In closing, my dear brothers and sisters in Nigeria, and you're all so very dear to me, the rewards of this journey are immense. We would need many days and sessions to cover all of the benefits that result from implementing each and every of these 6 elements in our lives. I promise you something, if you do them in earnest, you will see Allah's light and love manifest in your life in so many ways. Let me close by giving you a most incredible sacred narration, or a hadith qudsi, that really sums up what will happen when you revive yourself. Allah said, "Whosoever shows hostility to someone devoted to me, I shall be at war with him. My servant draws not near to me with anything more loved by me than the religious duties." Hello? Hello?
Yes, hello. We are here.
Sorry. Okay, I will redo that. Sorry, I got a call. I should have put my phone on airplane mode. So the hadith says, "Whosoever shows hostility to someone devoted to me, I shall be at war with him. My servant draws not near to me with anything more loved by me than the religious duties I have enjoined upon him. And my servant continues to draw near to me with supererogatory works, so that I shall love him. When I love him, I am his hearing with which he hears, his seeing with which he sees, his hand with which he strokes, foot with which he walks. Were he to ask something of me, I would surely give it to him. And were he to ask me for refuge, I would grant it. I do not hesitate about anything as much as I hesitate about seizing the soul of my faithful servant. He hates death, and I hate hurting him." That is in Bukhari. Is that not the ultimate revival, my brothers and sisters? Is it not the ultimate revival for Allah to take over your life and to give you so much barakah, and to be your eyes and your ears and your heart and your tongue? I wish you all the best in this wonderful. I hope that you will accept. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you, Dr. Basma, for sharing your personal story and for sharing this lecture with us today. At this point, we'll be taking questions. So if you have questions, you can ask them in the chat box. The first question that we have, you talked about talking to your God 5 times a day. How do we know that our salat is accepted?
Because we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
We can't hear her. We can't hear her. Moderator, please unmute her.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes.
Okay. So the part about the prayer, subhanallah, you know, how do we know that it's being accepted? The thing is, we have no guarantees of anything, but we're guaranteed that Allah's promise is real. And when Allah makes a promise, He does not betray His promise. When He tells you, if you do these things, I will become your eyes and I will become your ears, it means He is accepting, subhanallah. When He tells us what prayer does for us, it means that it is a truth. And the most incredible thing, you know the first thing that the devil does? the first thing that the devil does is he makes you feel silly when you pray. You know, when you do your sujood or you do your ruku', and it makes you feel silly, like, well, what are you doing? You know, why do you have to do this? And then he'll say, you know, how do you even know it's counting? You know, I mean, you're putting yourself through this and you don't even know if it counts. 5 times a day, you're leaving your life for just a few minutes, but still, you know, it's not worth it. That's the devil speaking to us. You know, that's not the voice of the divine, subhanAllah, and it's not our knowledge of the Prophet. So part of being a mu'min and part of being on this journey, a believer, is that you must believe in the most beautiful words of the Quran, and you must believe in the most beautiful attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you must believe in the mercy of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. And that belief, Rabbana says, "Ana and husn zanni abdi bi," which basically means I am I am what the worshipper believes me to be. I am what my servant believes me to be. If you believe him to be merciful, that's what you will get. So do your salah, tawakkal ala Allah. Don't ever let the shaitan or the devil convince you of anything other than everything you do that is good is being accepted. Absolutely everything. And your salah is the relationship. So it is where he will enter with his greatest intensity. And that's how this ummah was ruined. And that's why I really push this concept of prayer. I mean, as I said, I enter communities and I say, oh my goodness, if this community, if we can get people to wake up for Fajr with each other, this world would be very different for Muslims. And it's the scariest thing for people to see people able to do this. And it's the most beautiful thing. So establish your prayers and don't worry. Let the reward be with God.
Thank you. Salam, Jazakallah khair. Are there any specific gender-specific recommendations for personal revival? What are your recommendations for sisters, considering the barriers women often face in their communities and inequalities?
Ah, mashallah, mashallah. It's a big question. We need another halaqah. It's a very big question, mashallah. It's a very good question. Well, for me, I don't, you know, I didn't distinguish for me. For the sisters, I really advise them to focus on reading the Quran. You have to read the Quran. You have to know your rights. You know, you have to know what the Quran, the privileges that it gives to girls and to women. And there's so much to say about that. So I think one of the things that girls and women can and should do when they read the Quran is see themselves in it. Focus on the stories that have females and see how they're treated and see what is said about them. You know, there's many examples when we look at the mother of Sittana Maryam, when she said to God, I am dedicating to you what is in my womb. And what did God give her? He gave her a girl. That is the most incredible thing. He could have given her a boy to begin with. She could have had Sayyidina Isa. No, he gave her a girl. The gift that he accepted for himself was a girl. How beautiful is that? And then he took this girl and he nurtured her and he inspired her and he gave her one of the greatest prophets in history, Sayyidina Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. Look at the story of the queen of Malikat Bilqis, the queen of Sheba. You know, and look at how she had interaction with the strongest king that ever lived. God didn't make her an unequal. He put her, they had a diplomatic exchange in modern terms. There's a diplomatic exchange between the two. I mean, he didn't go over and send his armies immediately and destroy her. Now there's this exchange and we see how she very brilliantly navigated so there wasn't a war between them. We see how they exchanged gifts and ultimately how they settled their dispute. Now, the coolest thing is, of all the stories of the males in the Quran, it is only Malikat Saba, Bilqis, who actually brought her people into Islam. She actually became Muslim. And this is unlike all the stories that have to do with the men. And there's many other examples. One of the things we were discussing recently, which is the very unfortunate rise in domestic violence around the world during the COVID lockdown. And it's not just Muslims, it's non-Muslims as well. But with Muslims, there's this idea that, you know, that at any level, the male or the man, the husband has a right to hit his wife. And it drives me crazy because what has happened over time is there's a neglect of what that one verse in the Quran, 434, actually says. 434 talks about nushuz. You know, if you fear nushuz from your spouse, then there are these steps you can take, you know, advise them, don't have intimate relationships with them. And I firmly believe that وَضْرِبُهُنَّ means and separate from them. But even if, God forbid, we're going to take it to mean something that the Prophet never did, which was to lay a hand on a woman, we're talking about nushuz. And when they asked the Prophet, what is nushuz? He said, the fear that she is bringing a foreign man into your bed. So this is not only zina, we're talking about zina in the most despicable way. So the way it has been interpreted that this is open season, that you can hit your spouse or that you can discipline them through anything physical is completely un-Islamic. And it is because we have neglected a very, very important word in that verse. And we've only looked at وَضْرِبُهُنَّ. We didn't look at why. Why is he saying this? Even if we're going to accept that that's what it means, why is he saying this? If we look at the heinous nature of this behavior, that's a totally different story, and it closes the door for anything else. You know, not with a sawek, not with a shirt, not with anything. You do not humiliate women or your wives, because this is a very big crime that we're talking about when we do talk about this particular verse. So my advice to women is know your rights. Know your God-given rights. Know how God represents you in the Quran and the honor and the dignity that he gives you, and stand up for your rights. Stand up for your rights from the Quran, not from anything else, from the Quran and the Sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ said the best of you is the best to his wives. He also never laid a hand on a woman. So all this craziness around the world and this domestic abuse is ridiculous. So know the Quran and know your rights and strengthen yourself and stand up for yourself and find strength with other women and with other very good men. There's a lot of good men out there.
Thank you. What is the position of women leadership in Islam?
The position in terms of, are they allowed to be leaders? I would suppose that's what it's meaning. Like I said, we have the example in the Quran. Unfortunately, many men have tried to say, this is shara ma qablana, which is the traditions of those before us. I don't believe that that applies to the Quran. The Quran is for all places and all times. And Rabbana subhanahu wa ta'ala sets examples in the Quran, and he tells us take the entirety of the Quran, do not pick and choose from the Quran. So women can reach the highest levels of government. We're not talking about imama here. We're talking about the highest levels of government and administration. Women can be judges. Women can be CEOs. So there's nothing to prevent a woman from reaching every height in society. And subhanAllah, if we're talking about women particularly, and men, that pursue this journey of faith and then pursue things in the world where they are revived, they're only bound to do what's good and faithful for everybody else. But there's no limit on what women can do, so long as it is within, and men, so long as it is within the boundaries that we have in our faith. And women have a lot to bring to leadership, by the way. You know, it's really interesting that in the Quran, the Malikat Saba brings to the table a form of consultative democracy that, you know, has been demonstrated in the past 2 decades to be a trait of women when they lead. So women do bring something very important to the leadership table. They've also found that companies that have a certain number of women on their boards are more likely to succeed and more likely to do better. So there is a lot that women can offer. And this is supported by the texts, and of course by the life of the Prophet ﷺ, who highly respected women, and the Sahaba that came after him.
I believe Islam is a largely misunderstood religion, and much of the understandings have come from ignorance on the part of both practitioners and non-Muslims. How do you think we should remedy the wrong perception of Islam as a violent religion because of the actions of a few, especially in the light of the Prophet ﷺ's responses to people who insulted him, which brought converts to Islam, as opposed to reactions today, which pushes people away and fortified the wrong perception?
This is an excellent question. Yes, the life of the Prophet is a good example for us to learn from, and also, again, the Quran. You know, and when the Quran tells the Prophet, وَهْجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا. So even when somebody is insulting you, the Quran is commanded him to leave them in a beautiful way. You know, not even normal, just beautiful way. Or just turn away when something is happening that you're not in agreement with. Our religion is a religion of persuasion. The Quran is filled with persuasive techniques. The life of the Prophet is filled with persuasive techniques. Yes, I agree with you. There is a lot of misunderstanding, but part of it, a big part of it, is not just the way some practitioners are or non-believers are, but sometimes it's the way we are. And if we are practicing properly, if we are all actively trying to revive ourselves and to carry out our duties in the world and our responsibilities and to encourage others to do the same, it would be very different. I mean, I really think that we have to take the responsibility on ourselves. And I'll give you a really cool example that happened when I was working in the federal government in Canada. I had this system of I give places 5 stars. So the first star, obviously you can say La ilaha illallah, nobody's going to stop you from that. It's something you could do without doing anything. But then there was, did they give you prayer space or not? Are you comfortable in fasting or not? Is there somewhere where you could do workplace charity or not? And would they give you a holiday to go perform the Hajj? So there's this 5 stars, so anywhere I worked, I looked, do they have the 5 stars or not? And the last place I worked, they had the 5 stars, and it was amazing. And it was one of the times where I performed the Hajj. They even put a door on my office so I could do my prayers. And then one day, one of my colleagues knocked on my door and she said, Basma, I could never be Muslim. And I was so sad. It just took me by surprise. Like, oh my goodness, what? And she said, because I can't be that good. And I looked at her and said, what do you mean? She said, I can't do what you do. She'd been observing me. She'd been seeing how I behaved, what I did with the charity campaign, the different things I did. Unfortunately, that was her conclusion, that she could not be Muslim. Because I said, you know what? It's not true. I have my faults. Everybody has their faults. But this is the way Muslims live. And then so she chuckled and she said, but I can't give up my wine. And I'm like, okay, I can't help you with that one. So subhanAllah, it's the way we behave that makes an incredible difference in the world. And if we focus on ourselves, we can make a very big change in rectifying those misunderstandings.
Thank you, Dr. Basma. Do we have any more questions? We still have about 15 minutes to go. Okay,
Yeah.
Sabrina. Questions. How can Muslims be more active in their societies?
Oh, that's going to be on the 17th. We're going to talk about civic engagement.
Okay. We have another question.
We have a whole session on civic engagement on the 17th.
Okay, so we will re-ask the question then. Can women be presidents?
Yes, women can be presidents. Of course, women can be presidents. And right now, the best ruled countries in the world are actually ruled by presidents, by women. By women presidents. Why not? It's not Imam Salah. You're not going to stand in a mosque and it's not about that. Right now, being a president is like being a CEO. It's a job. It has administrative duties. It has political intelligence, policy intelligence. That's really what a president does. And of course, you have to have you have to be morally upright and religiously upright if you're Muslim. But we're seeing, like I said, some of the best leadership in the world is coming from women these days.
Do you have any advice for anyone struggling with hijab?
Yes. SubhanAllah. I had this struggle when I was younger, and I realized that it's something I eventually wanted to do. And so I stopped asking God about whether or not I should do it. And instead I began praying, oh God, let my heart be content when I do it. And one day when I was going to university, so my first year, I was quite young, and the wind was blowing my hair everywhere. And so I was, I normally wear a scarf because I pray. And so I lifted the scarf over my head and didn't take it off since, subhanAllah. It just happens. So my advice is that you remain persistent and do a lot of dua from your heart, that God makes you content to wear it, and that you are able to fight back, the faculties that I said you could fight back because you have your will. The other advice I have is wear it beautifully. I mean, you can wear the hijab very, very beautifully. You could be modest in very nice ways these days. And, you know, you guys in Nigeria, you have the most awesome ways of tying your headscarves. So, you know, do it beautifully and ask Allah to help you be content with it.
How do you look after yourself? What do you do for self-care?
What do I do for self-care? I try to exercise every day. I put in about 8 to 12 kilometers of walking daily. I try to eat well. I keep my weight under control, which is a struggle after you've had kids and gained quite a bit of weight having them. So coming back down is not as easy. But the most important thing is I keep my heart happy, and I forgive people very, very quickly. I don't carry anything in my heart. I don't carry any rancor, any dislike for anybody. I view the world through very empathetic eyes. And this does have some damage for me because I tend to be too sensitive towards people's pain. But I think having a heart, alhamdulillah, you sensitize your heart to be like that. You'll live a very good life, whether it's long or short. It'll be good and it'll be worthwhile.
Why is there a hadith that says women can't be presidents of a state?
Yes, there is a hadith that says that, and there's a lot of commentary that's written on that hadith, because the Prophet ﷺ, when he mentioned this hadith, it was in reference to a specific female leader of the Persians at the time, of the Furs. And his point was that if and when this woman, she takes power, that they will not be victorious. They will not, they will not be successful. So if you look, hadiths have to be taken in context, and they have to be taken, as I said, in relation or in conformance to the message of the Quran. This is what I believe. And this is how the Prophet ﷺ lived. This was not a blanket statement. This was a statement about a certain people, that qawm, you know, ما أفلح قوم. That hadith is talking about a specific woman. She was quite young. She took over after the males in her family had been killed. And he was making reference to that. If we're looking at the Quran and if we're looking at what happened thereafter, there is nothing against a woman being a leader. And as I said, the only example in the Quran where the head of state brought her people into Islam was Malikat Saba. So this is a huge deal. So again, we have to take hadith in context and understand the circumstance under which the Rasul ﷺ may have made some pronouncements. What was before what he said, what was after what he said, and what were the historical conditions in which he made that statement.
Aisha is said to have been a child bride. Can you please shed more light?
Again, it's an area where there is quite a bit of discussion. If you even look at the hadith in Bukhari, you will find that there is discrepancy among the different hadiths that have to do with her age. So there is that one where she says she was young, but then there are others that would place her age more reasonably between 18 and 27 years old, given other events that were happening when they got married. So it is highly unlikely that she was a child bride. It's more likely that she was 18 and above. And I'm asked this question, and then I've seen these discussions between jurists and scholars, and especially male jurists and scholars. You have to understand, part of me also comes from a policy or government perspective. This is the area in which I am trained. And with the damage that happens to young girls because of this, and I'm not just talking about losing an education, I'm talking about girls that lose their lives, whether because of intimate relations that they're not ready for, or because of pregnancy that their bodies cannot handle. So women, and girls in particular, don't have the luxury of withstanding this, forgive me for saying this, very silly debate that has gone on for quite some time. A child is a child. And if you know, males that take up this discussion, as you know, in the halls of academia or as jurists, I say to them, look at your own daughter if you have a daughter. Look at a child that's 8 years old or 6 years old or 7 years old, and tell me that that's someone that can hold responsibility. Tell me how that works with the ayat in the Quran that says that marriage is mawadda and rahma, that marriage is an exchange. How does that work? How does that work with a a young child to have the responsibility of marriage that the Quran expects of her, and that we saw in the life of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So this idea, this very unfortunate idea and misconception is completely misguided, and in my opinion, it is not Islamic, because nothing in Islam damages a human being. Absolutely nothing. There is no harm. And when we're talking about children that age, there's every kind of harm, socially, psychologically, physically. This cannot be part of our religion.
A bit off topic, but would you say that the choice of a spouse is essential to personal development and religiously too?
Yes, it's not off topic. It's also in the Quran. Of course, the choice of spouse is very important on both sides. Men have to understand that when they take a wife, that it is a big decision. In the Quran, it is described as mithaq ghaliz, which means a very deep covenant. And that is exactly what it is for a woman, and it should not be taken lightly. It's also, the Quran represents marriage as something beautiful and something you share, and where there's friendship and where there's love. And it refers to it as sakan. Sakan means, it's like a dwelling place. You choose the spouse, and that's where you are wanting to dwell for the rest of your years. And that person, whether it's male or female, you have to see somebody who's willing to put in the energy to make your life beautiful and to constantly improve in themselves, so that you are always excited by being with them. It doesn't turn stale and it doesn't turn boring. So choosing the right person, choosing the character, the demeanor, the akhlaq that suits you are very important. The Rasulullah said, you could choose based on family, based on wealth, based on looks, and based on deen. And then he recommended, and choose what is based on deen, choose what is based on religion, because marriages that are based on religion are based on taqwa. Taqwa means you are both heading for the same goals, you both want to do the same things, and you're not at least going to disagree on the very big aspects of your life and the big commitments. So it is very important to choose the right person. Also, and this is something that's come up a few times, choose somebody where, and I know this might be hard for some people to accept, but choose somebody where if God does not give you children, you're happy to be with that person. God says in the Quran that He gives some couples boys, He gives some couples girls, He gives some couples boys and girls, and He gives some nothing. And so marriage is not necessarily about having children. It is about the mawadda and the rahmah and the sakan and the beauty that another soul can bring to your life. So choose well, and so we can avoid hurting each other in this ummah, and we can re-establish an ummah based on these strong family bonds and mercy.
So the last question we'll take because of time. What advice do you have for the men that find it difficult to accept that women's rights are human rights and not that they're asking for so much?
Women's rights are human rights. Yes, women's rights are definitely human rights because we're human, but women's rights are also divine. The word hudud is mentioned in the Quran in 9 verses in 5 surahs. And some of you may think hudud is corporal punishment, physical punishments of Islam, criminal punishments. That's not how the word hudud is used in the Quran. The word hudud in the Quran is used as the boundaries or the limits of God. And about half of the mentions relate to women's rights, and particularly women's rights in divorce, when a man is most likely to be agitated and unjust. And so God is very stern in saying, respect the boundaries of God, respect the limits, because He's basically and essentially telling the men that their rights are divine rights, and you have to respect those rights. So not only, as I said, women's rights are human rights in Islam, but Islam came to show men and other women that our rights are enshrined in the Quran. It's wonderful that they're in some human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but in the Quran, our rights are much stronger, because in the Quran, our rights have to do with an all-knowing God that provided for reality, our real existence, who we really are as beings, and provided for that reality through the rights in the Quran, our rights to a good living, our rights to a comfortable home, our rights to a fair divorce, our rights to care for our children, whether in marriage or divorce, our rights to be dignified, our rights to privacy, for people not to talk about our behaviors and where we go so long as we are discreet. All of these things are extremely important. Our rights to respect from our husbands. I mentioned in yesterday's meeting that we had, men take for granted how special women are. If you look at Surah Al-Mujadila in the Quran, which is the lady who disputed with the Prophet or discussed with him the fact that her husband was abusing her by saying, when he got angry, he'd say, "You are like the back of my mother," which is a huge, huge insult. And yet this man would want to resume marital relations with her as if there was no issue. And the Prophet didn't know how to respond initially. But then this revelation came down just for this woman, saying, you cannot call your wives that. And if you do, you have to fast for 2 months before you touch them again. That's pretty intense rights right there, And it goes for any form, in my opinion, of abuse that diminishes the dignity of the woman, that makes her something haram for the man. Like saying you're like my mother is making you out of the realm of halal for your husband. Any insult of that nature requires expiation. So these are the rights of women in the Quran. Look at how gentle God is with the mother of Moses, for instance. He saved her son, then brought him back to her. He inspired her. There's many, many examples that demonstrate the nature of rights that women have in the Quran that I believe are much more suitable for who we are as a people and as a gender. So unfortunately, men that believe that are not reading the Quran properly, and they're not taking the message to heart, the spirit of the message to heart, and even the word of the message.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you, Dr. Basma, for sharing your knowledge with us. May Allah reward and bless you. May He honor you. We pray that Allah forgives you for whatever mistakes you may have made, and may He continue to bless you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I would like for us to please recite Surah Al-Kawthar for our speaker. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. Doctor, I have a favor to ask of you. Please, can you make dua for us, and then I'll make the closing remarks.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا وأخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين اللهم اعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا اللهم اكتبنا من عبادك الصالحين المفلحين المخلصين اللهم اجعلنا من المصلين يا أرحم الراحمين واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا وأتمم علينا شهر رمضان المبارك وتقبل منا أحسن أعمالنا يا أرحم الراحمين وارزقنا من حيث لا ندري ولا نحتسب يا رب واجعل بيننا جميعا المودة والرحمة وصلى الله على الحبيب الأمين المصطفى سيدنا محمد واحشرنا في زمرته يا رب يا أرحم الراحمين نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.
Ameen. Please join us again on May 17th. Dr. Basma will be speaking to us on Muslim civic participation, how Muslims can make a difference. Next week, we have Dr. Jasser Auda back with us, and he would continue with Did You Ponder on the Quran? Jazakallah khair. Stay safe and be blessed. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.